The sun rises over Constantinople. Long before emperors and soldiers wake, the city is already alive. Fishermen haul their catch through narrow streets. Spices from the east fill the air. Coins clink. Deals are whispered. This is not a palace. This is not a battlefield. This is the marketplace, where ordinary people decide what survives and what disappears. It is the year 1400. The empire is shrinking. Enemies wait beyond the walls. But here, in the market, life goes on, one trade at a time. In the gray light before dawn, long before the bells of the great churches begin to toll, the fishermen of Constantinople are already at work. They push their small wooden boats from the shores of the Golden Horn, that curving inlet of water that has sheltered traders and sailors for more than 1,000 years. The waters are cold, fed by currents flowing from the Black Sea through the narrow passage of the Bosphorus. And in these waters swims a treasure that has sustained the city since ancient times. The fishermen cast their nets in the same manner their fathers and grandfathers did before them. A work in teams, as required by the guild that governs their trade, always under the watchful supervision of an appointed officer who ensures that the regulations are followed and that the catch is fairly divided. Tuna, mackerel, bonito, red mullet, anchovies. The waters here teem with fish that migrate through the strait on their ancient paths between the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. The currents that flow through the Bosphorus push schools of fish directly toward the Golden Horn, and the fishermen of Constantinople have learned to read these currents the way other men read written words. By the time the first light touches the great dome of Hagia Sophia, the boats are returning. They dock at designated points along the waterfront, near the area the locals call Parama, where the wholesale fish market has operated since the days when this was still called Byzantium. Here, the day's catch is unloaded onto stone quays slick with seawater and fish scales. The fishmongers arrive to inspect the haul, assessing quality with trained eyes before making their bids. No fisherman is permitted to sell directly to ordinary citizens from his boat. The city authorities have forbidden this practice to prevent underselling and to ensure that proper taxes are collected. Instead, the fish must pass through the hands of licensed merchants who operate stalls in the marketplace. This is how Constantinople feeds itself. This is how it has always fed itself. Yet in this year of 1400, feeding Constantinople has become increasingly difficult. The city that once housed 500,000 souls, the greatest metropolis in the Christian world, has been hollowed out by decades of plague, civil war, and territorial loss. Perhaps 100,000 people remain, scattered across a landscape of crumbling magnificence. Entire neighborhoods within the ancient walls stand empty, their houses abandoned, their gardens given over to farming plots, where vegetables grow among the ruins of former grandeur. The city has not been this empty since the great plague of the 6th century devastated the population in the reign of the Emperor Justinian. But those who remain still need to eat. And so the markets continue. The main artery of commerce in Constantinople is the Meze, a broad avenue paved with marble that runs from the great square near Hagia Sophia westward through the heart of the city. Colonnaded walkways line both sides, offering shelter from sun and rain. And beneath these covered passages, the merchants of the city conduct their business in designated sections according to their trade. The regulations governing where each type of merchant may operate are precise and strictly enforced. The perfume sellers cluster near the Million Monument, close to the church. The gold and silversmiths work along the central stretch of the avenue. The pork butchers are confined to the tourist district. The silk merchants conduct their business on Embol Street. This geographic segregation serves multiple purposes. It allows the city prefect and his inspectors to monitor quality and prevent fraud. It enables the collection of taxes with maximum efficiency. And it prevents the kind of disorderly competition that might lead to price wars and social unrest. In Constantinople, commerce is too important to be left to chance. The merchants begin opening their shops as the morning light strengthens. They are organized into guilds, each with its own rules, its own hierarchy, its own traditions passed down through generations. A notary copying legal documents cannot also sell silk. A leather cutter cannot also work as a tanner. A baker cannot set his own prices, but must charge only a small markup above the cost of grain purchased from the state granary. These restrictions create economic compartments that limit competition while ensuring stable supplies of essential goods. For a city under siege, stability is everything. And Constantinople is under siege. Not in the dramatic sense of armies battering at the walls, though those days have come before and will come again. In 1400, the siege is something slower, something that tightens by degrees, like a noose drawn gradually closed. The Ottoman Sultan Bayezid, whom his enemies call the Thunderbolt for the speed of his military campaigns, has established a blockade around the city that has now lasted for 6 years. Ottoman forces control the countryside in every direction. The ancient roads that once connected Constantinople to the provinces of a vast empire now lead only to enemy territory. The city survives on what can be brought by sea, and even the sea lanes are increasingly dangerous. The Emperor Manuel II Palaeologos is not even in the city this year. In desperation, he has traveled to the courts of Western Europe, to Venice, to Paris, to London, seeking military aid that never seems to materialize. The Western kings receive him with ceremony and sympathy. They marvel at his learning and the elegance of his court, but they offer only expressions of concern and modest gifts of money. No crusading army marches to save Constantinople. The emperor has left his nephew John to govern in his absence, and there are whispers that John might simply surrender to the Ottomans to end the suffering. Yet in the marketplace, the merchants open their shops. The customers arrive to buy their bread, their fish, their cooking oil. The rhythm of commerce continues because it must continue. The alternative is unthinkable. Consider the baker in the early morning hours, working by lamplight in the heat of his wood-fired oven. He is one of the artopoioi, the guild of bread makers, and his life is governed by regulations so detailed that they specify the exact relationship between the price of his bread and the cost of the grain he purchases. His profit margin is fixed by law. His working hours are fixed by custom. The quality of his product is subject to inspection by officials who answer to the city prefect. Yet within these constraints, he makes decisions every day that determine whether his family prospers or starves. He must judge how much bread to bake based on his assessment of demand. He must maintain relationships with the grain merchants who supply his flour. He must manage apprentices and journeymen who work alongside him. He must satisfy customers who have been buying bread from his family for generations, and who would take their business elsewhere if the quality declined. The bread he produces is the foundation of every meal consumed in Constantinople. It is what the poorest laborers eat when they can afford nothing else. It is what the wealthy consume alongside their fish and vegetables and imported delicacies. Without bread, the city cannot function. Without bakers willing to wake before dawn and work in stifling heat, there is no bread. This is the invisible chain that holds a civilization together. The willingness of ordinary people to do ordinary work, day after day, even when the world around them is falling apart. Across the Golden Horn, in the district of Galata, a different kind of commerce thrives. Here, the Genoese have established a colony that operates almost as an independent city-state within sight of Constantinople. The great tower they built rises above their fortified neighborhood, a reminder that the Italians who live there owe their first loyalty not to the Byzantine Emperor, but to the distant Republic of Genoa. The Genoese came as traders and have remained as rivals. Their merchants enjoy tax exemptions and special privileges that Byzantine traders can only envy. They control much of the maritime commerce that flows through the straits, taking a share of profits that once enriched the imperial treasury. In a bitter irony, the annual revenue of tiny Galata in these years exceeds that of all Constantinople combined. The colony that was supposed to serve the empire has instead come to dominate it commercially. Ships flying the Genoese flag crowd the harbor at Galata. They bring goods from across the Mediterranean, textiles from Flanders, wool from England, metals from Germany, arms and armor from Italian workshops. They carry away the products of the East that still flow through Constantinople, despite all the disruptions of war: silk from distant China, spices from India, furs and honey from the Russian steppes. The Genoese have built a trading network that spans from the Black Sea to the Atlantic, and Constantinople remains a vital node in that network, even as the Byzantine state that once controlled it weakens year by year. The Byzantine merchants watch their Italian competitors with a mixture of resentment and resignation. They remember when their ancestors dominated the commerce of this city, when foreign traders were guests who operated under strict supervision, when the wealth of the Eastern trade flowed into Byzantine hands. Those days feel increasingly like ancient history. The treaty arrangements that gave the Italians their privileges were signed in times of desperation. When the empire needed naval support, it could not provide for itself, when the alternative to accommodation was conquest. Now those arrangements cannot be undone without military force the empire no longer possesses. And so the Byzantine merchant makes his peace with reality. He finds a niche where he can still compete. He builds relationships with customers who prefer to deal with a Greek-speaking shopkeeper rather than a foreign trader. He passes on his business to his sons and hopes they will find a way to prosper in a world that grows more difficult with each passing year. In the market square, a woman makes her way through the crowd. She carries a basket and moves with the purposeful efficiency of someone who has made this journey countless times before. She is looking for vegetables, cabbages, onions, garlic, the hardy produce that can be grown in the gardens within the city walls, and that forms the basis of most meals in Constantinople. Women in this city occupy a complicated position. The law and the church both proclaim them subordinate to men, suited primarily for domestic duties and the raising of children. Yet economic necessity creates space for female participation that official ideology does not fully acknowledge. Women work in the textile industries, spinning thread and weaving cloth. They work in food preparation and retail trade. They operate shops when their husbands are away or have died. They manage family businesses with an authority that emerges from practical competence rather than legal sanction. This woman may be a widow running her household alone, or a wife whose husband is occupied with other work, or a servant purchasing provisions for a wealthy family. Whatever her circumstances, she bargains with vendors, assesses quality, makes purchasing decisions that will affect what her family eats and how much money remains for other needs. Her choices are constrained by limited resources and limited options, but within those constraints, she exercises judgment. A vegetable seller from whom she buys knows her as a regular customer. Their relationship is built on countless small transactions conducted over years. Trust accumulates through these repeated exchanges. The seller offers fair prices because he knows she will return tomorrow and the day after. She trusts his produce because he has not cheated her in the past. This is how markets work, not through coercion or elaborate contracts, but through the slow accretion of reputation and mutual dependence. The spice trade in Constantinople represents something almost magical, the presence of the wider world in a city increasingly isolated from it. The pepper and cinnamon, the ginger and cloves that arrive in the markets have traveled thousands of miles from their origins in the islands of Southeast Asia. They have passed through the hands of dozens of intermediaries, local growers, regional traders, Arab merchants, Italian shippers, before reaching the stalls where Byzantine housewives purchase small quantities to flavor their cooking. Each pinch of pepper purchased in Constantinople contains within it an entire global economy. The demand for spices in European kitchens drives trade routes that span continents. The profits from this trade enrich merchants from Venice to Canton. The ships that carry these goods connect civilizations that know little of each other beyond the exchange of commodities. And Constantinople, positioned at the intersection of these trade routes, has always taken its cut of this commerce. But the spice trade also illuminates how much has been lost. Once, Byzantine territory included Egypt and Syria, regions that produced many valuable goods and controlled the ports through which Eastern spices reached the Mediterranean. The Arab conquests of the 7th century stripped these provinces away. Once, Byzantine ships dominated the maritime routes that connected East and West. The Italian republics have taken over that role. What remains to Constantinople in 1400 is a geographic position that cannot be taken away. The city sits at the point where Europe meets Asia, where the Black Sea connects to the Mediterranean, where east-west and north-south trade routes intersect. As long as goods flow through these channels, Constantinople will remain relevant. Whether this will be enough to save the empire is a question no one in the marketplace can answer. The silk merchants of Constantinople occupy a special position in the commercial hierarchy of the city. Silk has been associated with Byzantine prestige since the Emperor Justinian allegedly smuggled silkworms out of China in the 6th century, breaking the Eastern monopoly on silk production. For centuries afterward, Byzantine silk workshops produced fabrics of extraordinary quality, and the finest silks were reserved exclusively for the imperial court, their possession by ordinary citizens or foreigners strictly prohibited. By 1400, those days of silk magnificence are fading. The workshops still operate, but on a smaller scale. The strict regulations that once governed every aspect of the silk trade have loosened as the state's ability to enforce them has declined. Italian merchants, once forbidden from purchasing the finest Byzantine silks, now export whatever they can buy. The mulberry plantations that feed the silkworms still exist, but they are fewer and less productive than in earlier centuries. Yet silk remains a symbol of what Byzantium once was and what it still aspires to be. The purple silk that only emperors may wear still signifies supreme authority, even as that authority shrinks to encompass only the city and its immediate surroundings. The brocades in cloth of gold that Byzantine workshops produce still command admiration and high prices in foreign markets. The craft traditions passed down through generations of silk weavers still represent skills that cannot easily be replicated elsewhere. In the marketplace, the silk merchants display their wares with appropriate ceremony. A wealthy customer, perhaps a Genoese trader seeking goods to export, perhaps a Byzantine aristocrat looking for fabric to mark a wedding or a funeral, examines the offerings, feeling the texture of the cloth, assessing the quality of the dyes, negotiating prices that reflect both the intrinsic value of the goods and the social status of the transaction. For in Constantinople, commerce has never been merely economic. It is also political, social, and symbolic. What you buy, and from whom you buy, it says something about who you are and where you belong in the intricate hierarchy of Byzantine society. As the afternoon wears on, the market begins to thin. Perishable goods must be sold before they spoil, and the vendors who deal in fresh produce and fish slash their prices to move the last of their inventory. The permanent shops along the Maisie will remain open somewhat longer, but even they must close before darkness falls. Constantinople does not have effective street lighting, and the covered passages that seemed so welcoming during daylight become dangerous after sunset. The money that has changed hands throughout the day is predominantly Byzantine currency, though foreign coins also circulate. The old gold solidus that once served as the standard currency across the Mediterranean world has been debased repeatedly over the centuries each. Debasement reflecting another fiscal crisis, another moment when the state needed to stretch its resources further than precious metals would naturally allow. The silver and copper coins that ordinary people use for everyday transactions bear images of Christ and the Virgin Mary, of saints and emperors, inscriptions in Greek that proclaim the eternal glory of an empire that is visibly dying. Yet the coins still circulate, the markets still function. The credit relationships that allow merchants to operate without physical currency in hand still hold together, sustained by trust and reputation and the shared understanding that failure to honor one's estates means exclusion from a commercial community that cannot survive without mutual reliability. This is perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Constantinople in 1400, that ordinary commerce continues in circumstances that would seem to make it impossible. The city is surrounded by enemies. Its territory has shrunk to almost nothing. Its emperor is abroad begging for help from foreign rulers. Its future is uncertain at best and catastrophic at worst. Yet people wake up every morning and go to work. They buy and sell, borrow and lend, make plans for tomorrow as if tomorrow will come. In July of 1402, the impossible happened. On the plains of Anchir, far to the east, the Ottoman Sultan Bayezid met in battle the forces of Timur, the great conqueror from Central Asia, whose armies had swept through Persia and Mesopotamia and now threatened Anatolia. The battle was catastrophic for the Ottomans. Bayezid was captured, the only Ottoman sultan ever to suffer such a fate, and died in captivity months later. The Ottoman Empire, which had seemed on the verge of swallowing Constantinople, suddenly fractured into competing factions as Bayezid's sons fought each other for the succession. The siege that had slowly strangled Constantinople for years was lifted. Emperor Manuel returned from his fruitless travels in the West to find that his city had been saved not by any Western crusade, but by the internal collapse of his most dangerous enemy. Thessalonica was returned to Byzantine control. The tribute payments that Constantinople had been forced to make to the Ottomans were suspended. For a brief, precious interval, the empire could breathe again. In the marketplace, the merchants heard the news and drew their own conclusions. Business improved as trade routes that had been closed by the Ottoman blockade reopened. Goods that had been scarce became available again. Prices that had been inflated by scarcity moderated. The ordinary commerce of daily life became somewhat less precarious. But the older and wiser merchants understood something that the younger ones had yet to learn. This respite was temporary. The Ottomans would recover from their civil war. A new sultan would emerge, and he would remember that Constantinople remained unconquered, a Christian enclave in the heart of what was becoming an Ottoman domain. The fundamental weakness of the Byzantine position had not changed. The city still lacked the population, the resources, the military strength to defend itself indefinitely against a determined enemy. What the merchants had, what they would continue to have for another half-century, was time. Time to conduct their business. Time to pass on their trades to their children. Time to accumulate wealth and reputation. Time to live ordinary lives in an extraordinary city that had defied probability for 1,000 years, and would continue to defy it a little while longer. By evening, the marketplace falls quiet. The vendors pack away their unsold goods. The shopkeepers shutter their establishments. The porters and laborers who have spent the day hauling merchandise through the streets drift toward the taverns and cookshops, where they will spend a portion of their wages on hot food and drink. Tomorrow it will begin again. The fishermen will return to the Golden Horn before dawn. The bakers will light their fires in the darkness. The merchants will open their shops and display their wares. The customers will arrive with their coins and their calculations, their needs and their wants, their small ambitions and large anxieties. This is the rhythm that has sustained Constantinople for more than 1,000 years, through invasions and plagues, civil wars and natural disasters, moments of triumphant expansion and generations of slow decline. The rhythm continues because the alternative, chaos, starvation, social collapse, is unacceptable. The rhythm continues because ordinary people, making ordinary decisions, choose every day to participate in a system larger than themselves. The empire would survive another 53 years after that market day in 1400. In 1453, the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II would finally breach the walls that had protected Constantinople for more than a millennium, and the Byzantine state would pass into history. But the marketplace would survive that cataclysm too. The Ottoman conquerors understood, as all conquerors eventually do, that cities run on commerce. That trade must continue, that the merchants and artisans who sustain daily life are too valuable to destroy. The fish market at Parama would continue to operate under Ottoman rule in the same location where Byzantine fishmongers had conducted their business. The shops along the Mezi would be joined by Ottoman bazaars that followed similar principles of guild organization and geographic segregation. The Golden Horn would remain a harbor for trading vessels, though the flags they flew and the languages their crews spoke would change with the centuries. What survives is not the empire, but the market. What endures is not the palace, but the stall. What outlasts the rise and fall of civilizations is the simple, irreducible human need to exchange goods and services, to buy what one lacks and sell what one has in abundance, to participate in a community of commerce that connects strangers and sustains cities. In the early morning darkness of Constantinople, in the year 1400, a fisherman pushes his boat into the waters of the Golden Horn. He does not know that his emperor is in England, or that the Ottoman blockade will soon be lifted, or that his city will fall in 53 years. He knows only that the fish are running, that his nets are ready, that there is work to be done. He begins to row toward the current, toward the catch, toward another day in the marketplace, where empires are built and lost, where history unfolds one transaction at a time.